So I brought my posse here. They all get extra credit. So I'm not going to be, I don't have as much. Seth MacFarlane is amazing with what he does, so this is a hard act to follow. But I'm just going to talk about how I got to where I am today. And I called it Farm to Triton instead of Farm to Table. A little play on words. Helps if I turn this on. Okay, Dan, why is it not working? There we go. So I grew up in Michigan in a little tiny town called Mulliken. So where that green star is where Mulliken is. It only had a flashing red light going through town. When I grew up there was a hardware store, an elevator, 2 bars, and a grocery store. And a couple beauty shops too. Town of 500 people. I know people from Michigan say, I know every single town in Michigan. And I'll say, I bet you don't. And they'll go, yeah, I do. And I'll tell them the name and they'll go, huh. So not many people know about it. This was the town in the early 1900s. That was the heyday of the town. That's Main Street, Mulliken. And it was quite lively. It was on a train line, which was really important. There was another town adjacent called Saranac that the train they thought was going to go through there. When it didn't, that town died and this town became bigger. So here's the town as it is today, pretty much like it was when I was growing up. A lot of the buildings are torn down, businesses have closed. About 20 years ago, they closed the elementary school, which really killed the town because nobody wants to live where their kids have to ride a bus for 20, 30 minutes to get to elementary school. So this is the farm I grew up on, which is outside of the town. This was taken after I left. My father, people would fly around in these planes. This is pre-drone, and they would take pictures of farms and then come door to door and try to sell you a picture of your farm. My dad thought it was the best thing. So he ordered them all for us. He passed away that fall, but that farm picture got given to everybody. So there were some more buildings when I was growing up that had been torn down, like a corn crib, the storage for the tractor, the pig pen, the chicken coop. Those are all gone from this picture. So this is my mother. My mother's name is Annetta. She played a big part in my life and how I got to where I am. This is her at age, I think she was 20, teaching in her first teaching position in a one-room schoolhouse. At that time, you could get a degree. It was called a county normal degree, and you were qualified to teach in a one-room schoolhouse, but you couldn't teach in a regular school that had different grade levels. So you were qualified to teach from kindergarten to 8th grade and know all those subjects, but not qualified to teach. So here she is with her first class. So she from kindergarten through 8th grade. So she did that for a couple years. Then she got married. At that time, if you were married, you couldn't teach because you were only married men could teach. Married women couldn't teach. So she had my sister and moved out. My mother was a really strong person. She got married in January, had my sister in October. My sister's father died in December. So then for 4 years, it was just the two of them. But then she married my dad and had 9 more children. There were only 2 pictures of the entire family together. So this is one, and then here's all the kids except the oldest. If anybody can find me. I call myself the middle child because the last 2 were twins, and so there were 4 births ahead of me and 4 births behind me, or 4 pregnancies. And then this is the last picture, and only the second one of our entire family together. And unfortunately, about a year after this was taken, the sister with the long black hair passed away from cancer. So, where am I? What color am I wearing? Yellow, yeah. Yeah. So, I'm going to go back to my mom, how she played a big part. So, she raised these 10 kids. She substituted sometimes, but she also was our Girl Scout leader. She was the Boy Scout leader. The parents who had 2 kids didn't have time for that, but my mom did all of this stuff. And because she was a teacher, every summer we would go to the store and she would buy us workbooks. It was so exciting. We would get math and reading workbooks to do for the summer. A little bit later, she went back to school to teach, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And we would help her grade papers. So she was always very focused on education. She also, I was the only person who liked to do the arts, who liked to do drawing and sewing and knitting. So these are two projects that I did when I was 8 years old. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table, and I drew Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. And there was a high school art fair where you got ribbons. My sister was in high school at the time, and I was sure I won a ribbon. And we go to the high school to see everything displayed and see all the ribbons. And we go up to my drawings, and there wasn't a ribbon, there was a note. And the note said, "There's no way an 8-year-old child did this. Somebody cheated." And that's the worst thing you can say to a little kid. I didn't draw for years after that because they had killed my spirit. So my goal always is to try not to kill people's spirits if possible. But so my mother laminated them, and found them last night. So when I was 12, I'll go back a little bit. When I was born, I had a birth defect, and I had bowed legs, and so I wore a brace for a couple years. I was little, I don't remember it. My mother said I liked it. She said I cried when they took them away, because it was all I knew. Then when I was 12, I had a growth defect, and I had one leg that was bowed significantly. You could see a big bow on it. And I had a series of surgeries. Between the ages of 12 and 17, I had 8 operations. And sixth grade, I missed school 3 or 4 months. 7th grade, I hardly went to school. By 8th grade, my doctor, who was the most amazing man, he plays a big part in my life too, he told my mom, "We got to get her in school. We can't have her home." I had a homebound tutor, so I would stay home with the babysitter, and my tutor would come twice a week. I'd do my work in like 2 hours in the morning, and then her and I would watch soap operas and game shows while the twins slept, and I knitted, and that's where I really got good at knitting. So this was me, and my passion growing up was horses. So this is my first pony, this is Ginger, and I was the only one in the family who liked the horses. And we were in a parade. We would go to parades, and my friend Nadine. Here's another picture of me a little bit later with crutches on. So this is my childhood, was growing up with crutches. I could run faster than my siblings because I had a big stride, and I could run through the woods in crutches. It's what I was used to. And then here I am. I would take my horses to the county fair and show them at the county fair. So that's me a little bit older. This is my horse, Sissy. She was an Appaloosa, but she was part Arab too. And you can see how my leg is kind of bowed out. This isn't working here. My leg is kind of bowed out there. That's because I had to wear a brace. I had to wear a full-length brace. So can you imagine what high school was like? So when I was in 8th grade, they did send me to a school. They sent me 20 miles away because there was no school in my neighborhood in my area that was all on one level. So I had to go to a school 20 miles away. Later, I worked on schools for Oak Park, and I became an advocate that you never send a child away from their home. So that's Sissy, and this was Jimmy, or Babes Rotaz. He was a quarter horse and Arab. He didn't live very long. He had an accident on the ice when I was in high school. So how did I get into architecture? I've been thinking about this, and I don't really know. You see where I grew up. I did not know an architect. I did love math, and I loved art. And this house is in the next small town where my dad grew up, called Sunfield. And it was owned by his boss at the time, Jack and Frances Mapes. And I was named after Frances. And she was the most elegant woman. And this house, to me, was a castle. It's where I saw my first Sub-Zero refrigerator. I saw, beautiful furniture and things laid out. So I know that played a part in it. The other part, some of you are going to get, is the Brady Bunch. And I could think that these are the only 2 ways I can think I know of. So the Brady Bunch, if you didn't know, the dad, Mike Brady, was an architect, and he'd always come with rolls of drawings. And they lived in this mid-century modern house that was there's another picture, that was very, using mid-century aesthetics. Those are the only two influences I can think, because by 7th grade, I decided I was going to be an architect. And all through high school, I took drafting classes. I was the only girl in my drafting classes. We had a drafting room in the basement. It was all hand drafting. And my teacher was Mr. Blethen, and he would, some days the boys didn't act very well. I'm looking over to this side. And he would go, Francis, go leave 10 minutes early. And he would yell at them for swearing or doing something. So those are, I think, what my inspiration was. So high school wasn't very fun for me. I was teased. I was even teased by a teacher for how I walked. I didn't have many friends. And everyone said, oh, high school is the best years of your life. And I thought, this can't be it. And if it is, I'm kind of done. So my doctor helped me find scholarships, and my mother. My dad said, no, you can't go to college. And my mother, I said it was because he didn't think he could afford it. We were very poor. Not dirt poor, but we didn't have money, but we never knew we were poor. And she said that he didn't want to be embarrassed that he couldn't pay for it. So my doctor, my orthopedic surgeon, who I had since I was a baby, helped me find scholarships, and so did my mother. And I got this State of Michigan competitive scholarship. It paid all my tuition for any school that I wanted to go to in the state of Michigan. Now, at that time, tuition was cheaper than your room and board. So I still had to cover the room and board, and I had to do that with loans and scholarships. So I go off to college in 1976. And right before I left, my sister had passed away that summer. My father had had a major heart attack and no longer could work. It was his second heart attack. And my mother was working minimum wage, and she still had 5 kids at home. So there was no support from home. I had jobs. I worked all the way through college, and I had this scholarship. So I go to University of Michigan. That was the school I chose. There were 3 architecture schools in Michigan. One was Lawrence Tech, which didn't have such it wasn't as great of a school. The other one, which I really liked, was University of Detroit, which was a private Catholic school. My mother said, please don't go to Detroit. And I said, okay, I'll go to Ann Arbor. When I went there, I grew up in the country. I thought, oh God, there's so much concrete here. Now I look back at it, it's a really leafy green city, but not where I came from. This was my first dorm, Alice Lloyd Hall. This is the back end of it. I kind of freaked out because I ate dinner with more people than lived in my hometown. So it was a big change for me. And I was the first in my family to go to college. My mother had had that county normal degree, but I didn't have a lot of support. My mother supported me more than my father. My father didn't understand a lot of it. My junior year, I went to live in Aix-en-Provence, France, and I went to the university. It was an exchange program through the University of Michigan, and I lived in the dorms, and I took classes, and I was the only American in any of my classes. So this is that's where I was first exposed to markets, these beautiful markets. So I did that for a year, and then I come back to the University of Michigan Architecture School. So this is a picture. It wasn't as messy when we were there, I don't think. That's the building. It was one big, huge open room, and all 4 years of the architecture program. So that architecture program was called a 2-2-2. You do 2 years of general studies, then you went into the architecture program, got your bachelor's, and then you got a 2-year master's. So I did that. I did take a gap year between my undergraduate and master's for some health reasons. But then, this is just a drawing. I was trying to find something from my time there, the watercolor. Everything was done by hand. There were no computers. So everything was hand drawn. Then when I finished school, I thought, my master's was in what was called energy conscious design, which I was really proud of. And I came to Chicago, and I couldn't find a job. I'd hand my resume over, and it said energy conscious design, and they would hand it back to me and say, we don't do that stuff. So nobody was doing that here. And a friend of mine, who the students are going to see his talk in a few minutes, named Doug Farr, who I'd gone to school with. He lived across from me as a freshman. And he I met with him to, where can I find a job? He goes, go try out this place called CNT. It was the Center for Neighborhood Technology. And they did a whole bunch of different things from greenhouses on roofs, which they were vilified for. They were the first ones to tell people to disconnect their downspouts. Everyone hated them. They're the ones who, you've heard of IGO, the car share? That was invented by CNT. There's a lot of stuff. They're really cutting edge. The CEO, why am I spacing on his name, Dan? Scott Bernstein had all these crazy ideas, and he was just coming up with crazy ideas all the time. So I worked doing energy conscious retrofits on multi-family housing. And that's where, when I went there, they didn't have a seat for me. My program was new. And they had me sit at this desk, this big desk, and I had this much space cleared out because somebody knew I was going to sit there for 3 weeks while they were on vacation. And that turned out to be my husband's desk. So that's where we met, was at CNT. I only worked there 1 year, and then I went to work for an architecture firm. We did mainly libraries, worked on the River Forest Library, amongst many others. And by that time, I had my daughter. And then we got married in Unity Temple and moved to Oak Park. This is, most of you, I think, all know what Unity Temple is. Dan, you said that I was on the restoration committee for the Frank Lloyd Wright Home and Studio and for Roby House. So Dan was on the oversight committee to fully restore Unity Temple. So both of us have a love of architecture and of the Oak Park architecture. And that's Oak Park, where I've lived for 36 years now. Yeah. And we have a house, a 110-year-old house that I spend lots of time on. Oops. And during that period of time, I had a business with a friend. We did high-end kitchen design, and we just closed the business this year after 30 years. And so that was a big thing. And she also, some of you know, Jo Beth, was my business partner. She was the chair here at Triton, and she said she knew I loved to hand draw. Would you teach drafting? I said, I wouldn't be very good at it. She goes, no, you'd be really good. I'm not sure she believed that, but she needed somebody who was available during the day, which I was, because I was home with my kids. So I did it, and I taught drafting. It took me a while to get into it. And then I found I really loved it. And then I slowly added a few other courses. Let's see, this is my family about the time I came to teach at Triton. That's my son, Ethan, and my daughter, Sophia. So, and then, oops, we lost it. Well, let's go down. I'm not good without a mouse. We'll go back to here. There we go. So I taught part-time for quite a while. Jo Beth left as the director. They hired somebody else as the director. He lasted for a couple years. The program was really pretty small by that time. And I agreed to take it over part-time as the coordinator. And I think I did that for 5 years to bring the program back. And we've gone from, I always say we're the fastest growing program on campus, but it's easy when you're at rock bottom, and we keep adding up. So we're still continuing to grow. And I've been very proud. I started the construction technology program, construction management certificate, plumbing and carpentry programs. And I get to bring in my love for architecture and the importance I feel for sustainability. Here's some of my students. Some of you guys are going to recognize at the top. This is an older group. We do an egg drop. So Dr. Campos, we drop eggs off of the library. I don't know if anybody's ever seen us doing that. We put a mat down, but that's a fun project. Most people like that. That's in the intro. And then the bottom one is a tour from the architecture club when we went to the Schweiker house, so a year and a half ago. So it's been fun to do. This was an architecture club a few years ago, so I've been the sponsor for the architecture club. And it's fun to see people grow and evolve and move on. I had to put my dog in there. This is Lloyd. You all know who he's named after. He's been gone for a few years, but he was a miniature poodle, and he was bigger than life. And then And then I had to put my grandchildren in. So I don't show you my children grown, but these are my 4 grandchildren, 2 in Winnetka and 2 in Denver. And so we all got together for Christmas last year, which was the first time all of us had been together, because 2 of these babies are COVID babies and 1 is after COVID. So the cousins really couldn't know each other well. And this is why I love what I do. This is from a few years ago. This is at graduation. So the one on the left, Alexis, works in project management, and he's a realtor. He's the one I thought would go to architecture school, but he decided to take a different path. He's very successful. Miguel is an architect. He went to University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. He's an architect now. And Genesis graduated a couple of years ago from IIT, and she lives in Chicago, and she's an architect. So I'm in touch with all of them, and I love to keep in touch. Just reconnected with a couple students this past year. LinkedIn really helps. One student was here from the construction technology program, and he was here because he was representing his company, Clune Construction. He sent me an email. Francis, I'm going to be there, hope to see you. And so I told all my students who were in my print reading class that they got extra credit if they went and took a picture with Jack. So he goes, I wondered why everybody was taking pictures of me. But he's now on our advisory board. So a lot of my students come back. He's on our advisory board. He just led a big tour for our print reading class to a huge construction site, and they love him at Clune. So I think that's it. Yep. So that's kind of the story. It's, of how I got here. I will say that when I was in college, there was a young woman who was when I was my first year of architecture school, and she came from Chicago, and she came up to me one day and she said, what makes you think you could be an architect coming from where you come from?
She don't know Francis is sassy.
Well, I wasn't sassy, I was very quiet. I don't know why I intimidated her, but so you all can do it. Everybody can do it. So that's my last slide. Anybody have any questions?
How was it studying abroad?
Studying abroad was one of the best things I ever did, because it taught me, so just like my surgeries when I was younger and not being able to, being the weirdo, I'm the person with braces on or cast, people weren't friendly to me. You know what high school's like. So then studying abroad was opened me up to what it's like to be a foreigner and what it's like to be different. And at that time, when I studied abroad, the French hated the Americans. I think they still sort of do. They weren't real nice. So it was a big coup when my French got good enough that they thought I was German, then they were nicer to me. But I knew what it was like to be really far away from home, and what it was like to be in the corner and nobody would talk to me. So I've used that and try to I hope I engage people and try to pull people in, just what it's like to be different. And when I was in architecture school, the other thing is there were 10% women. So it was almost all men, and then that one woman. The architecture schools are now about 50% women, which is really good. But we just went, Danielle and I and a couple other students just went to the Chicago Women in Architecture luncheon. There's still not a lot in the high positions. It's hard for women to have a family and to succeed in architecture. I mean, I kind of did smaller things and more of a back road. This is a great way to end my career is at teaching. But it's not easy to women have it harder wanting to have children and being in a career like this because it's long hours. When I was in architecture school, we would, towards the end of a final project, we'd be working I'd not sleep for 3 days and just maybe nap under my desk. And my father never believed me. He told me I was lying. He supported me in his own way, but my mother understood. She would send me, and remember, she's working at minimum wage. She would send me a card with $10 put in. She would send me, there was one point where it was my last year of my master's degree. My student loans hadn't come through, and I was going to have to quit. But my cousin was a banker at a small town bank in Michigan, and he said, oh, I can just write her a bridge loan, but just a parent needs to sign for it. My dad said, nope, you got enough education. So my mother said, don't tell your dad, meet me in Lake Odessa at the bank, and we'll sign the papers. So she was always a big support. What's that?
We love Mama.
We love Mom. So she had a hard life, though. She lost 2 husbands. She lost my dad when my son was 1. But then she had a 3rd partner for the last 20 years of her life who was just a sweetheart. So she had some good relationships, but hard. I mean, 10 kids. And she was very egalitarian. Everybody was treated equally. And I will say that after I went to school, my sister right behind me did not go to college, but the 4 youngest did. There's a lawyer, a banker, and 2 engineers out of that. So, and they said that they just followed my path and they got the same scholarships I did. Yeah.
So how did you keep up with the different changes in architecture as it evolved and developed, especially now with the different green aspects and things? What do you do to keep yourself on the...
So when I started teaching part-time here at Triton, and I'm like, I can take a class for $6 a credit hour? Go for it. So I started taking classes. So I took Revit classes, I took drawing classes, I took photography classes, I took all the Adobe classes. So that's one way, is I use Triton. I read a lot, I go to lectures. My husband's an engineer and he's an energy engineer, so our dinner conversations are a lot about this stuff. But really, Triton helped a lot, because when I went to school, there was no AutoCAD. When we got our first big job with my business partner, we got AutoCAD, and she sort of taught me some of the stuff, and then, like I said, I took classes here at Triton. Because you have to constantly be learning. And Michael can attest to this. It's very different than when we started in school, and you have to constantly be learning, or you're going to put yourself out. There was an AutoCAD class when we were in the M building years ago, where there were a couple people, remember the recession in 2008, or the depression, however you want to call it, architecture firms, there were principals of architecture firms who lost their jobs because they couldn't pick up the slack because they'd never bothered to learn AutoCAD. So we saw that. So just keep learning. Yes?
Was Frank Lloyd Wright the main reason why you wanted to practice in Chicago, or kind of move?
No. I wanted to move to Chicago. I had a friend who lived here. I wanted a city with good mass transit and great architecture. There's only one city in the United States that fits that. Otherwise, I'd have to go to Europe, because Chicago has the best architecture in the United States. And the mass transit's pretty good. So that's what I wanted. I just wanted to take trains and work in a city. And I thought I'd be here for 2 years and never left. I thought I'd have a farm and horses. So, but Frank Lloyd Wright became, first time I saw that church was before I finished grad school. And I thought it was the most beautiful building I'd ever seen. So when Dan and I decided to get married, I said, we're getting married in Unity Temple. And at that time, we weren't living in Oak Park, but we did get married there. Yeah.
Can you talk about your impact on Oak Park? Like, I know you've been there for many years and many projects there.
Oh, okay. So I used to volunteer for a lot of things. I was on they had a big committee because they were going to redo all the schools. And they picked one person from each elementary school and then several community leaders to kind of research all the schools. So I talked to everybody and said, I want to be the one from Irving. And so I was picked to be on that committee. And then I spent, was it like 5 years on it, right? So I was on the committee where we met every Monday for 2 years to plan this. We toured every school. And then I was picked from that group to be on the group that chose the architects to work on the schools. And then I was on the oversight committee for all the schools being built. So that's some big impact. And that's when I would say at the meetings, you know, we need to have a plan to get, because only one school had an elevator, and it was a freight elevator. We need to have a plan so that every elementary school has an elevator, because you don't take a kid from their neighborhood. They'd already learned that with special ed. The other reason is when I had to go 20 miles to junior high, I got picked up in a car with all the special ed kids, because they weren't allowed to go to the regular schools. They went to their own special school. And I got dropped off, and I was just, I'm in 8th grade. I'm already weird. I've got a brace on, or I'm on crutches. And I was just mortified. By the end of that year, I loved these people who rode in the car with me. And I learned to love them. And I also realized, they were part of a community too. So that's one way. And then a few years later, we were doing they built the main library in Oak Park, and they were doing the little library that is in our neighborhood. And so I was asked to be on that. I had been on the Friends of the Library Board, and I said I wanted to be on that committee. And we interviewed different architects. And if any of you have a branch library, they're treasures. I don't know where you live in Oak Park, but it was the Mays Library. And they're treasures. And we interviewed different architects. The architects came from who had done the big new library, and we asked them, what do you see, what are the functions you see that you need in a branch library? And they said, you don't need much, because they just should go to the main library. So the 3 residents who were there when the architect left, we all said, no way in hell are you hiring that person. They don't understand what a branch library is. So I was involved in that. My big coup on that one was, it had 5 levels, but it was really only a 2-story library, and it needed to be accessible. So we had a great architect who came up with a plan to get a ramp in the front, and then there was a back addition, and it was weird. And I said, everyone thinks that's an add-on anyway. Why don't we tear it down and build it right? So they tore it down, and they rebuilt it all on one level, and made a space that worked. And to this day, I don't think people realize that that was an addition. They did a really good job. So kind of just oversight stuff. And then I was on the restoration committee for Roby House for about 20 years. Those of you who've had Doug, that's where I met Doug. When I was looking for a history teacher, I went, oh, Doug. So those are probably the main things that I was involved in. And then I do work on my own house all the time. Any questions? Any other questions? Yeah.
What would be like one key technique for like architecture students like us to like keep going?
I see people afraid to take on the expense of the loans. And don't be afraid. I was afraid. I mean, I had nothing. My father was on disability, and at that time they would only pay for 2 children. I was the oldest of the dependent children, so I was supposed to get $50 a month, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was back then. And they couldn't afford to give it to me. So I got that money taken off of my financial aid package. So I had to borrow money. I always worked, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs. And just don't be afraid to take on the loans. You'll be successful. And I will say architecture school was hard. It's a lot of work. It was also the most fun time of my life. Would you say that, Michael?
2 out of 3 ain't bad.
2 out of 3? It was fun. You make a lot of good friends. I still have a couple really good friends from architecture school that actually saw last fall. Yeah.
So do you find yourself reimagining spaces that you visit from time to time, or?
Oh, yeah. I'm always giving the college ideas for how I want to move my spaces around. Yeah, I do. I've been known when we rent a room to move the furniture around because it doesn't fit right in the space. Yeah, you always do. I always tell the students it's a blessing and a curse because you'll see good design, but you'll also want to have really good furniture and things in your house, and you need to learn to
Maybe interior design would be a nice minor to have, kind of pair the two.
So I don't recommend that people do interior design. And I'll tell you why. Because an architect can be an urban planner, a landscape architect, or an interior designer, did I say urban planner? They can do all of this stuff. An urban planner, my daughter's an urban planner. She can only ever do urban planning. If you're an interior designer, you can only ever do interior design. So it's the umbrella group. So I'm say just go, you can focus on interiors. Like we just had a jury with a woman who's an architect and she does just interiors. But if you're just an interior person, you can never do anything else. So it's really the umbrella degree. It's a great education. It's the last of the Renaissance educations, in my opinion, where you study a little bit of everything. You just learn. Like they were opening the time capsule this morning. I was telling my students we had to put a time capsule in a library. We were burying it into a wall. And so one day I was told, figure out how to do a time capsule. So I had to research. This is pre-internet. How am I going to do a time capsule? We ended up with a baby's crypt that we put into the wall because it could be hermetically sealed. And so you're always learning something new, always. If you aren't, find a different job, but there's always something new to learn and some new idea, new product. Things are constantly changing.
I'm glad you said what you just said about it being the umbrella thing, because I don't know, 10 years ago, I said that to my best friend whose daughter was about to go into interior, and I said, you really may want to look at going into this. I thought I was kind of imposing at the time, but I just tried to be candid, and she actually wound up doing just that. And so I'm not the only one who offers that kind of advice, but now she is in Detroit practicing.
Yeah, and don't let math scare you, because most architects, you have to do geometry and algebra, but if you're a good architect, you're going to hire an engineer to make sure your building stands up. So you just got to get through it. Don't be worried about that. We have a student right now who just wants to do interiors. She's known that's what she wanted to do all the time. So but one of her parents' best friends is an interior designer, and she said, get your degree in architecture and then do interiors, because then you have a broader base to pick from. So, anything else? Nothing? Are you surprised by my journey? They hear stories. I tell them stories all the time.
Well, let's give her a warm applause.
Thank you.